Bridge Building Heathen here. Welcome back. So, we're talking about what I call the Alphabet Soup series, which is about LGBT plus issues. And later in the series, we'll especially focus on gender issues. But first, I'd like to bring up some stuff that got thrown around about Lacey Green and the nature of debate in the first place, which is the concept of argument to moderation, which a lot of people accused Lacey Green of as a logical fallacy, of this idea that because you're not on the far side of one side or the far side of the other side, the truth is somewhere in between, that automatically makes you kind of engaging in a logical fallacy, because not every two extremes necessarily have a good middle point. Or, some people will use as a simplified straw man version, well, there is no middle point between it's right to kill people and it's wrong to kill people. It's just one or the other. Then there's the other logical fallacy of the false dilemma. And what the false dilemma is basically saying, no, you must pick between one of these two extremes. There are no third options. There is no other way. Humanity is a lot more gray than that. It's not always that black and white, and it's not always the exact middle point either. Sometimes it's an 80-20 split. Sometimes it's any infinite number of variations in between. Sometimes it's, each side lists 10 points, and maybe one side has 2 points that are correct, and another side has 4 points that are correct, and one side is wrong about 6 things, and the other is actually wrong about 8 things. Humans are fallible like that. We're messy like that. And, a good case in point is, literal Hitler, because literal Hitler liked dogs. No person in their right mind would think that being anti-World War II Nazi means you have to kick puppies simply because Hitler liked puppies. So, this whole idea of... Now, one of my favorite phrases is that even a broken clock is right twice a day. And that's the thing. We're humans. We only have so much information. I don't know everything. You don't know everything. And it's not necessarily an age thing either. Different people have different life experiences. Speaking of which, though, half the world's population is under 30 right now. And in some countries like ours, it's more like 1/3. In others, it's more like 2/3. And in the US in particular, 1/3 of that number is on Tumblr. That's roughly 10% of the US being under 30 with a Tumblr account. And that means a number of bloggers driving all of this aren't just people with social justice related college degrees. They're also teenagers that no one can tell are teens once a post goes viral enough. A number of bloggers driving all of this were only 5 years old or less in 2001 when 9/11 happened. Why do I bring this up? Well, I don't remember what it was like for LGBT people in the 80s and 90s, or even before. And that's a problem, really. We all have different data. What I know and remember of LGBT history isn't going to be what another person knew or experienced. But that's the thing. We're all limited as human beings by just our experience of the world. A good case in point of that, and racism is a totally separate episode series, but there was a Dominican priest who was around on a college campus saying prayers for people on the campus, and people thought he was a KKK member. And anybody wondering why? Well, Dominicans wear white. And for those of you who are like, well, the Catholic Church should change that to make that less confusing. Well, the thing about that is, even if you don't care about Catholics who happen to... I hate to put it this way, but even if you don't give a frell about Catholics in Europe or Catholics in North America who have white skin, you're also telling all of South America to change their traditions with Catholicism. So maybe you'll care a little more about that if you're the sort of person who'll be like, well, they should just change it for the convenience of some of us. If I have to make the argument that most of the Latino community is Catholic and you're telling them they've got to change it, and most of the Filipino community is Catholic and you're telling them too that they've got to change it, that's sad that I have to make an argument based on the skin color of the people you're telling to change, but that's where we're at. And maybe the fact that I put it that way gives you some pause for reflection. And the fact that that might have actually made a shift in an assumption you may or may not have made might give a reflection there. And similarly, with LGBT issues and feminism, we're talking about people who came out of a culture where, we are so divorced from the birth of feminism and what it came from that it's unreal. Because you look at, for example, my mom's generation. When my mom became a teenager, she had no idea what puberty was, what was going to happen to her. She literally started her time of the month, thought she needed an ER, and her mom handed her a pad and said, "Here, use this." That was it. There was no other explanation of what was happening with her body. There was nothing else. And she's not alone in that. That is a very common story for people who grew up in the 40s and 50s and even early 60s in the United States. Now, within that, you had women who started these groups. There was no explanation of biology. No one knew what a clitoris was, what a vulva was, how the female cycle worked. Like, it was not discussed for the most part. Most women did not know about their own bodies. So most early feminist second wave groups were really just information studies. I mean, there's that classic scene of these feminists taking these mirrors and looking at their own genitals and trying to figure out how their own bodies worked and explaining to each other and spreading this awareness and basically just having the early part of the puberty conversation that their families never had. And this came out of a long line, too, of where we still see in many parts of the world female genital mutilation. And we still see in many parts of the world where when they talk about the idea of patriarchy, quote unquote, where that really came out of is this idea that, okay, women gave birth. It was very easy to tell who the mother of a child was. But the only way you could tell the father of a child is if that woman was definitely certain to have never been with anyone else. So the amount of control it would take to make certain that a woman never was with anyone else, many people view as the origin of the idea of patriarchy. This idea that women shouldn't show strong emotions, should always be submissive, because if you are trained into that role, then you are less likely to kind of go do your own thing or get ideas in your head. I mean, it sounds weird though, because what that's saying is that people believe that women had to be subjugated in order to not run around and cheat. And that's kind of sad. So there are definitely some issues with that idea. But you could also at the same time make the argument that, well, maybe some guys were just paranoid in wanting to be really, really sure. And there are certainly historical studies on that, where that has absolutely been the case. And we even see it in some of the smaller cultures that still exist, where there is, for example, polygamy, and you see people controlling multiple wives, perhaps, in order to make certain that they are only with that one guy, and they will put a woman to death for it. Not necessarily a guy, but a woman, yes. It was even considered an improvement when they basically stopped having women, I'm going to phrase it as commit seppuku, or more or less, whatever the ancient Roman equivalent was, just because they suffered sexual assault. Because that was how it was in ancient Rome. If you were a woman and you were sexually assaulted, you were basically expected to take a flying leap off the nearest temple. So that's not good. We've come a long way since then, thankfully. But that's, that is how things were at some points in human history. And that's some of the history of what has happened in early feminism. Humans have been through a lot, and a lot of this was really based on just how you were born. There wasn't this idea of any choice in the matter. If you were born with ovaries and a vagina, and they didn't even necessarily know if you had ovaries, if you were just born with a vagina and presumably boobs, this is how you were treated. It had nothing to do with your identity or preference. This is just how you got treated. And this is a major point that second wave feminism was focused on. Now we're going to get into some of the issues within third wave feminism, but that is for a future episode. Hopefully I've given you some food for thought, and as always, let's go out there and build some bridges.